whole meeting for Diamond Lake School District 76. Roll call, please.
Mr. Armenta. Ms. Hale.
Here.
Mr. Houtman.
Here.
Mr. Candela.
Here.
Ms. Kwan. Here. Mr. Lozada.
Here.
Ms. Sullivan.
Here. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We now move on to public comment on agenda items only. Do we have any public comments this evening? If you have a public comment, please feel free to type that in the chat and we will read it into the meeting. Is that the comment box? Okay. We'll wait a minute just to give people a chance to type. Okay, I don't see any public comments, so we will move on to presentations.
I think we have two presentations for this evening. The way they're listed on your agenda is summer school update, Westfield Middle School proposed schedule changes for the 21-22 school year, and then the 2021 summer school update. I'm going to ask Mr. Preble to go first and provide the 2021 summer school update, please.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Sharma Lewis. Sammy, as I go through this, I'll break it up by the bold headers and then pause. So happy to say that we will be offering summer learning again this year. The dates will be Monday, June 7th through Thursday, July 15th.
Estamos muy contentos de poder decirles que vamos a poder empezar escuela de verano. Las fechas serían del 7 de junio al 15 de julio.
We will be able to offer extended school year, otherwise known as ESY, in our, we'll be able to offer extended school year, otherwise known as ESY, in person or remote. We currently have about 45 children that are committed to attending ESY, 39 of them in person, 6 of them remote. So we'll do a simultaneous hybrid. We'll design that with the staff that's there.
Vamos a poder ofrecer escuela extendida que se llama ESY, va a ser en persona o a distancia. También sería de lunes a jueves de 8 a 11:30 y actualmente tenemos 45 niños que van a estar en persona y 6 que van a estar a distancia. 45 in person.
Yes, 45 committed, 39 in person, 6 remote.
45 de los estudiantes están cometidos para participar en la clase, 39 están en persona y 6 van a ser a distancia.
And that schedule will follow our traditional summer school schedule, Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 11:30 a.m.
Y ese también seguirá el mismo horario que la escuela de verano, que sería de lunes a jueves de 8 a 11:30.
Our general education intervention and enrichment program will still be online this year, and I'll get to why in a minute.
El programa de intervención y enriquecimiento de educación general va a ser en línea otra vez.
It'll be designed to be an adaptive program that will offer check-in times with D76 staff members.
Sería una plataforma de aprendizaje individualizado adaptivo. Tendrían sesiones los estudiantes de revisión con el personal del Distrito 76.
We're going to offer literacy and math, and depending on which platform we decide to go with, we have potential for Spanish literacy as well.
Vamos a concentrarnos en literatura, matemáticas y hay algún potencial que también será literatura en español.
And in an additional return to normalcy, we're offering a summer band as well this year.
Tratar de regresar un poco a la normalidad, también vamos a poder ofrecer banda este año.
The dates for that are June 21st through July 1st. Same days and times as summer learning, so Monday through Thursday, 8 to 11:30.
So, las fechas para la banda de verano sería del 21 de junio al 1 de julio. Serían los mismos días y horas que el aprendizaje de verano, desde lunes a jueves, de 8 a 11:30.
So the culminating activity for the band, there will be a concert that will be recorded here, and then we will stream it out to the public the evening of July 1st.
Y una de las actividades para la banda va a ser que van a poder grabar un concierto y después lo van a presentar en la tarde del 1 de julio.
The difference between this program and our academic program is the band program is a paid program, but it is open to all of our current West Oak campus 5th, 6th, and 7th graders.
La única diferencia entre el programa de escuela de verano y el programa de banda es que es un programa de paga. Sería ofrecido a todos los estudiantes actuales de quinto, sexto y séptimo grado.
All right, so the rationale for why we've designed the program the way we have.
So, el justificamiento del modelo, por qué lo hicimos de esta manera este año.
No matter what, we emphasize, and one of our priorities is the summer learning program for our kids in this district.
Una de nuestras prioridades en este distrito 76 es el aprendizaje de verano para los estudiantes.
So one of the challenges became when we sent out the family survey, 54% of the respondents came back saying that they're not interested in summer learning at all this year.
So, uno de los problemas que tuvimos cuando mandaron la encuesta a las familias fue que 54% de las familias no están interesadas en el aprendizaje de verano este año.
We also have limited space due to the projects that are happening in district this summer.
También tenemos espacio limitado por los proyectos que van a estar pasando aquí en la escuela este verano.
And as I had mentioned in previous updates, the ESY in-person learning was going to be our focus. We wanted to start there and see where it went.
Como había mencionado antes, que ellos quieren, el director se quiere enfocar mucho en los programas de ESY, que es la escuela extendida del año, debido al espacio limitado.
So the online platform for the general ed intervention and enrichment allows us a lot of flexibility.
So, la plataforma en línea permite que los estudiantes, les permite mucha flexibilidad.
So this is something that doesn't have to be done between the hours of 8 and 11:30. It can really be done at any time, regardless of which platform we go with.
So, con esa plataforma tienen la flexibilidad de poder hacerlo en diferentes horarios, no solamente de 8 a 11:30.
But there will be, office hours for District 76 staff to check in with students who are enrolled during that 8 to 11:30 time frame, Monday through Thursday.
Pero habrá horarios para que los estudiantes, como oficinas de horas de oficina, para que los estudiantes puedan hablar con un personal del Distrito 76 de 8:30 a 11:30.
And then the platform just allows additional flexibility. So if students are doing other things, which, as things open up this summer, baseball, swimming, whatever, camps, they're able to do both and they'll still be able to continue their learning.
Esta plataforma permitiría más flexibilidad a los estudiantes, ya que todo se está abriendo este verano para poder participar en diferentes programas y también llevar a cabo otras actividades.
So our next steps are basically confirming the ESY student placement registration, which that part is actually already done.
So, el siguiente paso sería, uno de los siguientes pasos sería confirmar los estudiantes de la escuela extendida y la registración, que ese paso ya está hecho.
And then begin the registration for our general education program as well as the summer band.
Y empezar el proceso de registración para intervención y enriquecimiento de la educación general.
And basically just finalizing everything we need to do to get the program running. And that's, general ed student registration, staffing for both ESY and the general ed program, and registration for, not registration, the finalizing device deployment, which is already actually done.
Ya los siguientes pasos serían ver todo lo que se requiere físicamente para los salones, finalizar el personal que va a estar aquí en la escuela y cómo implementar finalizar la implementación de dispositivos.
And then we'll communicate summer band information. I'll be working with Jessica Rosales on that, and as soon as she has her information ready, we'll get it out. But everything should be starting to flow out next week.
Y si, finalizar también la comunicación sobre la registración de banda de verano, va a trabajar con la maestra Rosales y ya para la siguiente semana deberíamos de tener más información.
Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that. So if I may ask, what would you say is the goal of this ESY program? I think traditionally you think of it as, extending additional learning. Are we going to do any remediation? So in your words, your goal, please.
So the ESY program is the extended school year program. That's actually a special education program.
Okay.
So I'll stop there.
So, una de las preguntas es de cuál es la meta para este programa de verano. Tradicionalmente será un poco diferente.
So the goal for ESY is for our students who are receiving special ed services to continue working toward their goals that are in their IEPs.
So, la meta para este programa, esta plataforma es para que los niños que están recibiendo educación especial puedan seguir con sus metas para poder cumplir sus metas de su plan individualizado.
The general education portion, which will be the online piece, is an adaptive program that will meet students where they are and then generate a trajectory to get them back to grade level.
Y los otros estudiantes que van a estar usando la plataforma adaptiva nueva, básicamente van a ir como individualizados en qué nivel están y poder seguir trabajando en mejorar esas habilidades.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
What percentage of students normally participate in the summer program?
La siguiente pregunta es de cuál es el porcentaje de estudiantes que normalmente participan en la escuela de verano.
Traditionally, and this goes back before I was involved with running the program, is somewhere about 50% of our kids would either be invited or actually register.
Dice que en el tiempo pasado, antes de que tomó este programa, más o menos eran como 50% de los estudiantes que eran invitados o 50% de los estudiantes de que se hayan registrado.
But then only about half of those students would actually attend.
Pero al final solamente la mitad de esos estudiantes asistirían a la clase.
And then we would take a week off for July 4th holiday. And then after that, only half of those students would come back. So we finished with about a quarter of our enrollment traditionally.
Después de eso, normalmente toman una semana de vacaciones para el 4 de julio y después de eso solamente la mitad de esos niños regresan a la escuela de verano y terminan con una cuarta parte de la registración.
Last summer, we had half of our students actually enrolled in attending with the online platform.
El año pasado tuvimos 50% de los estudiantes registrados y que estaban participando en la plataforma en línea.
So for this summer, we are moving more towards online because of our construction projects.
Combination of sorry, go ahead.
La siguiente pregunta es que si este año estamos haciendo más la plataforma en línea debido a los proyectos de construcción que van a pasar este verano.
One of them is space availability. One other reason is staff availability, and the other is family availability.
Una de las razones es por el espacio limitado que va a haber este año. También va a ser la disponibilidad del personal este verano y también la disponibilidad de las familias.
Has there been any discussion about students being burned out of online learning? I know I've personally experienced that with my kids. So it just makes me fear that people are gonna just opt to not do it at all if there's not an an in-person option.
Yeah.
Otra de las siguientes preguntas es que si han tenido conversaciones sobre el cansamiento de los niños estando aprendiendo en línea. Dice la señora que ella personalmente ha tenido esa experiencia con su estudiante en casa.
The survey that went out did not specifically cover that, but in some conversations, and I'm talking very limited sample set, in some conversations it was not so much the burnout that's turning, when we look at the 54% that aren't interested, it's not so much the burnout as it is other things are going to be available again, and we want to go do that.
Dice que si han tenido esos tipos de conversaciones, en una capacidad limitada, no tanto, pero cuando ven el 54% de estudiantes que no quieren participar, es más porque hay más cosas disponibles este verano, cosas se están abriendo y van a haber más actividades disponibles para los niños.
So our objective was to find something that was a win-win. We continue student learning and we could have some flexibility with it. And the online piece, this adaptive online piece gives us that.
Por eso trataron este objetivo de poder hacer como algo de ganancia, de poder dar esa flexibilidad a los estudiantes, de poder hacerlo en línea y también.
I mean, I know a lot of thought and work and everything goes into finalizing these plans. But it just seems like some kids aren't going to learn as well online, or maybe that's already kind of shown itself. And with that burnout, is there any option for opening up?
I could definitely retake a look at it and see, what availability we have to house it and staff it. And then hopefully everybody shows up that would enroll in person too. So there's that piece, but I can definitely take a look at it.
Una de las preguntas eran que si sabe que ha tomado mucho tiempo y planificación para este proyecto, pero pues hay una manera de poder hacer que algunos niños puedan venir en persona a ofrecer eso, y el director dijo que definitivamente es algo que puede ver, si es algo que es posible y cuántos estudiantes van a poder registrarse y poder asistir al programa de verano.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I had just a couple quick questions. And one, I wanted to say, I think it's great that consideration has been given to prioritizing ESY students for attending in person this summer, because I think that there's enough data that shows that those students learn better in person. So I'm glad that consideration was given. In thinking back to previous summer school presentations, I seem to recall only about 100 students attending over the summer. Does that sound like a ballpark number?
Probably, when things were, not to use the word normal.
Well, pre-pandemic.
But pre-COVID, with the way things were, yeah, that would probably be accurate, but there was probably double that, if not triple that actually enrolled, so to speak. And then,
Sure, I'm just talking about the numbers, I know that Mr. Williford at the end of the summer would kind of give us a debrief to talk about how many students actually participated and how, they did in the program, and whether or not they were able to make progress or kind of stay on top of closing that gap to make sure there was no regression. So I know you were talking about percentages earlier. I was just trying to wrap my head around the actual numbers of kids.
Yeah, that number is probably fairly accurate. I obviously don't have it in front of me, but numbers were low. But I know that as a building principal, when we were gearing up for summer school and distributing invites to families and looking at our tier 2 and our tier 3 kiddos, the numbers were, that's a large population of large percentage of our population. And regardless if they committed or not, the actual numbers that showed up was more along 100 and 200 students. And then it would drop after the 4th of July. So the first 4 weeks you'd have, those amount of students show up, and then that would just cut in half basically afterward.
Sure. And then, thank you. Oh, I'll give you a chance to answer.
Sorry.
La siguiente pregunta era que quería anotar y agradecer que el director que hayan puesto en consideración a los estudiantes que participan en el programa de ESY, porque sabe que esos estudiantes si aprenden mejor en persona. Quería saber más o menos cuál era el número de los estudiantes que participaban en el programa de verano. Mencionó que era el número aproximadamente como 100. El director mencionó que las personas que se registraban eran más como triple ese número, y ya las personas que participaban y venían al programa eran más o menos 100. Y le estaba preguntando sobre los números de registración del año pasado y de los otros años.
Yeah, I just was talking about how the numbers would constantly decline as the program goes.
Y los números básicamente se iban bajando de la registración de los niños que venían a participar en el programa. Durante, más que pasaba el tiempo de, ya pasando el 4 de julio, venían menos niños y así iban bajando más los números.
And then I have two other quick questions. First, how many staff do you anticipate needing for this summer?
¿Cuánto personal piensas que vas a necesitar este verano?
I could fill up to I have 7 classrooms available that I could put an instructor in each one. I could actually combine classes and get it down to 5 classrooms. This is for ESY in person.
Actualmente tenemos 7 salones donde él puede poner a 7 maestros en un salón. Serían para clases de ESY. Podrían bajar ese número a 5 también.
On the gen ed side, with the adaptive online piece, it depends on what enrollment looks like, because we'll set up teachers to work with a roster of students. And maybe that means that a teacher's working 2 hours each day and they're seeing 10 different kids on Monday and they rotate them through. So it'll depend on enrollment.
Y la parte de educación general es de todo dependiendo de la registración de estudiantes. Básicamente podría ser que una maestra esté trabajando solamente 2 horas al día y esté viendo 10 niños en esos horarios y poder cambiar días con ciertos niños.
And one last question, when do you anticipate opening up the registration for the gen ed enrichment piece of it?
La siguiente pregunta es cuándo anticipa poder abrir la registración para educación general.
Next week.
Great, thank you so much.
La semana que viene.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Preble. Thank you, Ms. Calderon. All right, our second presentation this evening will be on updates that Mr. Cunningham, Mr. Peterson, and Dr. Graka, and members of their scheduling committee at Westfield Middle School have been working on throughout the year. And I believe they put a lot of time, effort, and thought on maximizing student options as well as supporting as many students as they can for interventions, resources, as well as extensions and enrichments. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Ben, and again, Ms. Calderon will be translating. Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman-Lewis. I first want to compliment Mr. Preble and specifically his socks. I want to recognize them tonight. They don't make it on camera, but I really appreciate them and what they brought to the meeting tonight. So
Thank you.
you don't need to translate that, Sammy. Before we go into next, really the hope tonight with sharing some of our scheduling changes is, one, you can get a kind of an understanding of and demystify kind of what happens at the middle school and what our schedule looks like, has been and will be. And at the same time, begin to ask hopefully some thoughtful questions. And with scheduling, many times there's more questions that come up the more you think about it. And we love scheduling, so we're happy to answer those. What else would I say? You want to translate that? Go for it. Okay, we'll go right in. All right, first one. So some updates, just some changes from this year. The first one is we added an assistant principal, Mr. Peterson, and it's actually assistant principal appreciation week. So I just want to share, we really appreciate Brandon for many reasons. We're very thankful that the board approved his position. He has shown himself to be a person of character and is someone that brings in a vast skill set and everything from understanding people to social emotional learning, which we'll talk about in a moment, to he's focused on making sure this building runs well. And a lot of these things we'll talk about in the schedule, he's been able to make happen at the middle school and campus wide, really. So we're very grateful for him. And Sammy, go ahead.
Uno de los cambios que hemos hecho este año es que agregamos a un subdirector, y esta semana es la presentación del subdirector, el señor, él ha podido traer muchas cosas buenas al distrito, ya sea con los horarios, cambios de horarios, y también.
Yeah, you can sort of shorten it, Sammy, that's fine. Please don't feel bad about that. The second one is instructional coaching. That was something approved this year, and there's actually a fun link there, Mr. Hanson, if you'd be willing to click on that. So we've added one instructional coach, a technology coach across the campus, and then a coach at the middle school. And so this is a data piece they use to capture what they've been doing. So Sam, go ahead.
Otra cosa que hemos agregado es coaching instruccional. Han podido agregar uno para la secundaria, otro para la escuela intermedia. Y esta es una página que sigue un poquito más datos.
So I can't emphasize enough how much teachers grew as teachers at both intermediate and middle school during the pandemic and teaching online, because they had coaches that were helping them work on practice, work on how they presented, work on strategies. I can't explain enough how much happened so quickly and how to improve the level of instruction.
Dice que no, lo que ha visto, el crecimiento que ha visto con los maestros, con la instrucción, con el coaching instruccional, el crecimiento que han hecho es grandísimo. No puede explicar, no puede expresarse suficientemente del crecimiento que han hecho debido a tener a estos coaches que tienen de instrucción.
So part of the responsibilities is they track what they are doing, be accountable. So you can see this is how Tyler Smith tracked his, with who he worked with, how many times he worked with them. And you can see from that line graph that Eric's leaving, that you can see when we came back to school, all of a sudden how it took off even more because they had access. So between the two of them, they probably had over 720 coaching experiences with teachers just at this campus.
Uno de las cosas que podrían hacer el coach instruccional de la escuela secundaria fue poder ver con quién estaba trabajando y el crecimiento que han hecho, y se puede ver la diferencia que hicieron cuando ya pudieron regresar los maestros en persona a cuando estaban en casa y los cambios que han hecho.
So thank you for humoring me, Mr. Hanson, with that. So back to the presentation, a couple other things we've introduced this year. We've really created a very comprehensive system we call MTSS, which is how we identify what kids need support and what subjects, when they get the support, how we know they're making progress, when they can exit.
Otra de las cosas que implementaron este año es el integral MTSS, que son sistemas de apoyo de varios niveles.
And staff meet in what we call professional learning communities once a week, where 1 week they focus on how they're going to improve their instruction and they support each other. And then the other week, they meet to problem solve about individual students and talk about who needs additional support.
El siguiente cosa es el proceso PLC, que son comunidades de aprendizaje profesional. Una semana los maestros se unen para poder... what was the first week?
Just talk instruction, improving instruction.
Para probar instrucción.
And then the last one is social emotional learning. This is the only time Brandon's going to talk tonight, so we need to cherish this. So Brandon, why don't you talk about that?
El siguiente es el aprendizaje social y emocional, y esto va a hablar el señor Brandon.
Better make this good then.
Yeah. Well,
Sammy looked up the part about cherishing.
yeah, she's doing a good job of editing this.
Yeah, I don't know how to say cherish and stuff. But yeah, our short little plug on our SEL work. Perhaps you guys may have read some of these things that we've been doing in the parent newsletters for each of the principals this year.
El aprendizaje socioemocional, no sé si han podido ver algunas de las actualizaciones que han mandado durante las semanas.
This committee was started at the beginning of this year. We currently have 15 members, representatives from each of our 3 buildings.
Este comité empezó al principio del año y tiene aproximadamente 15 personal del distrito y son de varios edificios.
We started this program with the purpose and goal in mind of improving our social emotional learning, not only for our students, but we wanted to make it more all-encompassing to include parents as well as our staff as well.
Empezamos este grupo para poder ayudar a los estudiantes con el aprendizaje socioemocional con la meta, pues, pero también de poder ayudarlos a los papás y al personal del distrito.
So this is kind of a big endeavor here on our district's part, but some of the work that we have done is we've broken down the SEL committee into 3 subcommittees.
Este es un gran proyecto que están haciendo aquí en el distrito, pero han podido separar en 3 diferentes partes.
And the 3 subcommittees are staff, or student and family resources,
Una de las partes es el recursos de estudiantes y familias,
teacher skill sets, and then finally staff social emotional health.
y las habilidades de maestros y la salud socioemocional del personal de la escuela.
So keep an eye out for future blurbs in parent newsletters, and then we'll also be offering a number of other things for our students here moving forward. But we've just started, and we're looking forward to how we're going to grow into next year.
Así que sigan buscando diferentes actualizaciones que van a estar mandando durante el año del aprendizaje socioemocional y también diferentes actividades que va a haber en el distrito.
Great job, Mr. Peterson. Thank you so much. So I'm going to try to speak very matter of fact and keep it very simple. Otherwise, we'll lose Sammy for one, and because there's so much information. So you feel free to ask any questions or just kind of absorb some of these things. So the first, so I'll just go into it, Sammy. I'll just kind of read through. So these are considerations we had going into making some schedule and offering changes. The first thing was a number of years ago, we lost 45 minutes of core reading time, and we wanted to gain that back.
So, algunas de las consideraciones que hicieron para hacer esas actualizaciones de programación fueron las siguientes. Una sería que hace varios años perdieron aproximadamente 45 minutos de tiempo de lectura básica y es algo que quieren recuperar.
And the second point, actually, the next 2 points go together, is we've had some great growth this year, but we know that about 60% of our students would benefit from some intervention or additional support in reading.
Sabemos que estos 200 puntos van un poco de acuerdo. Hemos tenido un gran crecimiento este año, pero aproximadamente 60% de nuestros estudiantes beneficiarían de la intervención y apoyo adicional en lectura.
Yeah, the reality is we could argue 100% of our students could use more support. Another one is we do not have a heritage program for Spanish speakers. And what I'm referring to there are students that speak Spanish at home. They have a level of fluency, but they were not part of our dual language program.
Algo que quería poner es que no tenemos un programa cultural para hispanohablantes. Básicamente hay niños que hablan español en casa y no hay un programa para ellos.
To give some context, Mundelein High School, for example, offers a heritage program where heritage speakers can take, there's usually special seals and designations you get if you offer that. And so we want to give our students that opportunity that are part of that group.
So, por ejemplo, en la escuela, la Modelo High School, ellos también ofrecen un programa cultural y ellos también aquí en la escuela secundaria quieren poder ofrecerle algo a sus estudiantes.
In our current model that we use now, students that exit any interventions, everyone has to take Spanish. There's not a choice, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
En nuestro modelo actual, los estudiantes saliendo de intervención tienen que tomar español, no tienen ahorita ninguna opción.
Okay, and the last consideration we had is we do offer a lot of pathways. You'll see in a minute, for a small school, students have a lot of different paths they can take.
Y también ofrecemos muchos caminos para una escuela pequeña. Los estudiantes tienen varios caminos que pueden escoger.
Okay, so this next slide, these are 3 different schedules. Really, these are our schedule has 9 periods or 9 slots in it in a day.
So, estos son lo que actualmente ofrecen para los estudiantes, que serían un día de 9 clases.
So I'm just going to go through 6th grade, just to give you an idea. But each period, each slot represents a set of choices students have in their day, and they choose between these items.
Primero solamente voy a hablar sobre de 6º grado, el horario de ellos y las opciones que tienen actualmente los estudiantes.
Okay, so the first one is 3 levels of math. Matemáticas acelerado y matemáticas honores, or math accelerated math, honors math. The second one is ELA, English Language Arts, or accelerated English Language Arts. So that's arte de lenguaje inglés o arte de lenguaje inglés acelerado. El tercero or third is la historia, ¿cómo se dice dual? Dual, la historia dual. Let's see, the 4th choice are 4 ciencias, y the 5th choice has many things in it. There's literatura dual, arte de comunicación, or intervención, or resource. ¿Cómo se dice resource? Okay, gracias. Okay, the next choice is advisory, which that translates like consultivo,
Clase de consejería.
gracias, intervención o resource, and then banda o coro, y
Educación física.
después sí, educación física o salud. And then we have our wheel. I'll let you translate these ones. So if our wheel, a student gets to pick from 3 to 4 choices: art, music, DMA, or fuse. So arte, música, arte de digital medios, I think.
Arte digital.
Yeah,
El
which-
medio digital.
this is called learning on the fly. And then STEM or fuse. And then ultimo es noche. So those are the choices, the 9 choices they have during the day. I tried to save time with Sammy. I think we made it worse. So I won't do that again. Okay. So what changes between 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is in 6th grade, they take comm arts. That's a second ELA period. In 7th and 8th grade, everyone takes Spanish. So it turns into a core class right now. So that's how it currently works at the middle school. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so again, I'm gonna just kind of go matter of fact because there's a lot of information here. So there's a number of changes we're proposing. The first one is we talked about losing those 45 minutes of ELA. We're gonna add them back in a communication arts class in 7th and 8th grade.
Estos son los cambios propuestos para esta vez. Hablamos sobre cómo habían perdido 45 minutos de literatura y estos tratando de regresar a sus 45 minutos. Ellos van a querer agregar una clase de comunicación de artes para 7º y 8º grado.
Okay, this class will support what's happening in the other English language arts class, but we will especially focus on the 4 modes of reading, writing, listening, and speaking.
Ellos se van a enfocar con esta clase en la lectura, escritura, escuchar y el habla.
And so we are working with the ELA team right now to identify a 6 through 8 rubric that we're all going to agree on for writing in all 3 forms to make sure we're seeing the progression we want to see across all 3 grades.
So, lo que están haciendo ahorita es trabajando con los diferentes grados para poder crear un tipo de
Okay.
un tipo de formulario donde puedan estar de acuerdo con qué nivel van a estar los niños aprendiendo.
Okay. We plan to slowly introduce an executive functioning curriculum. That's organizational strategies. We will offer, and we're going to use Rush Medical Group for that. And we will teach that class in advisory, which is study hall is the best comparison I can give for that class. And also taught with our special education resource class.
So, planeamos introducir lentamente un plan de estudios de funcionamiento ejecutivo a través del grupo médico Rush, que se enseñará en la clase de recursos PET y la clase de consejería.
Okay. We will invite students in 5th grade, the students that are in 6th grade comm arts, and our current 7th and 7th grade Spanish students. They will be invited to join Dual Lit, which is right now only offered to dual language students. So I'll review that in a moment. If they are highly proficient in Spanish.
So, ahorita lo que van a hacer es invitar a los estudiantes que están en comm arts actualmente de 5º y 6º grado y los estudiantes que están en la clase de español de 7º grado a unirse a la clase de literatura dual si es que son altamente competentes en español.
Okay. Dual Lit, we're going to change the name of that class to Spanish Language Arts.
Van a cambiar el nombre de literatura dual a arte del lenguaje en español.
The rationale for that is we want the class to be more than about studying novels. We want to make sure our students are building their literacy skills in Spanish, the same 4 modes. You can see it shows up in comm arts, and you can shorten this, Sammy, but it shows up in comm arts and as well, reading, writing, listening, speaking. So everybody's getting that. So you might be building your Spanish literacy skills. We're going to still use the novels. There will still be a novel each trimester, but we're going to put the focus more squarely on that element, those elements.
So, lo que se quieren enfocar no tanto en los libros que van a estar leyendo, sino más en la alfabetización en español, se hace en lectura, escritura, comprensión auditiva y expresión oral. También van a seguir leyendo libros, pero se quieren concentrar más en la literatura.
Okay. So we put that communication arts in, so that means something happens to Spanish, because it used to be in one place, now we move it to another. So Spanish now becomes a choice or an elective in 7th and 8th grade. So students would either choose now those classes listed there, art, digital media arts, music, or STEM, or they would pick none of those and take Spanish instead in 7th and 8th grade.
So ahora, sorry.
Go ahead.
So ahora lo que van a hacer es la clase de español se va a convertir en una clase electiva para séptimo y octavo grado. Los estudiantes van a tener la opción de escoger artes de medios digitales, música y ofius o el español.
So just to give the board some context of what Spanish does for a student if they take it, if they took Spanish in 7th, 8th grade, they get credit for Spanish 1 in high school, but they don't get course credit. So they get to skip into Spanish 2, but it does not give them the credit for Spanish 1. And so high schools have I'll shorten this. High schools have in some ways shifted from students really needing to have language, and this is kind of matching more with what we see middle schools doing with their Spanish class.
So lo que han notado es cuando los estudiantes toman en séptimo y octavo grado el español, cuando entran a la high school no tienen que tomar español 1, pueden pasar a español 2, pero no les da crédito a los estudiantes. Entonces es algo que están viendo en diferentes secundarias que quieren poder hacer para los estudiantes.
So another thing to explain here is that students that are currently in Spanish in 7th grade, they can take Spanish in 8th grade. It will just now be a choice for them where they will take Spanish or they would take the encore wheel.
Y otra cosa que quería explicar es que los estudiantes que ahorita están en séptimo grado, que están tomando español, tienen la opción de tomar español en octavo grado, pero ahora van a poder tener la opción de escoger alguna de las otras clases.
Okay, so the next slide are some, oh, sorry, Mr. Hanson. On the next slide are some examples, just so you understand what might happen with the student. If your student is in a dual language program, the 3 classes they'll take that would affect them in what we just explained, they're going to take English language arts, they're going to take Spanish language arts, and they're going to take dual social studies.
Esto es solamente un ejemplo para cómo se vería el programa. Si un estudiante está en el programa de lenguaje dual, tomará artes de lenguaje inglés, que es ELA, artes de lenguaje español, SLA, y estudios sociales duales, que es SS.
A student in the general education program takes English language arts, takes communication arts, and takes social studies.
Un estudiante en el programa de educación general tomará artes del lenguaje inglés y Com Arts y ciencias sociales.
And then a student that we would invite to join the heritage program. And we anticipate this is about 6 students per grade level, to give you a number for that. They would take ELA, they would take Spanish language arts, they would join the dual language students for that class, and then they would take regular social studies. So dual language social studies will remain just for those in the dual language program.
So, y los estudiantes que van a ser invitados al programa cultural tomarán artes de inglés, de lenguaje inglés, artes de lenguaje en español y ciencias sociales.
Okay.
Y aproximadamente son 6 estudiantes por grado.
So on the next slide, this is the same thing as before, only now it shows the changes. So I'm not going to go through all of it. In the middle there, you can see what we've changed. Now students in 6th grade can take Spanish language arts, Com Arts, or we give them an intervention or resource, which for the purposes of this presentation, I did not talk about what that means.
En esta página pueden ver los cambios propuestos que van a hacer. Pueden ver que en la línea del medio, ya los niños de 6º grado también tienen la opción de tomar SLA, Com Arts o intervención y recursos.
Okay, and so that continues in 7th and 8th grade. And then at the bottom, you can see now Spanish has moved down there. So 6th grade, everyone takes that we call the encore wheel. And then in 7th and 8th grade, you pick, do I want to take the encore wheel or Spanish?
Y eso continúa en la 7º y 8º grado, esas opciones. Si vean la línea de abajo, es donde puede ver la rueda de Encore, que es arte, música, DMA y STEM. Y en 7º y 8º grado también se da la oportunidad de que se unan a la clase en español.
And what this actually does is students that were in intervention or in special ed or English language arts resource were not able to get Spanish before. So now they could actually choose it when they did not have a choice in the past.
Y eso lo que hace es dándole la oportunidad a los estudiantes que estaban recibiendo intervención y recursos o estaban en educación especial, les da la opción de poder escoger español como una clase.
Okay. So that leaves us the last slide, which are our next steps. We are going to have a coffee with the principals tomorrow at 11 a.m. to go over this again, to explain some of this amongst other things.
Y estos son los siguientes pasos. Es mañana tendremos un café con los directores a las 11 de la mañana y poder explicar un poco más en detalle todos los cambios.
We'll explain some of these changes in our 4-9 family communication.
También también van a poder explicar los cambios en la comunicación familiar que se va a mandar a abril 9.
We'll identify our 5th through 7th grade heritage speakers and give options to the families.
Se va a identificar a los niños que van a estar participando en el programa cultural y darle a las familias esas opciones.
And then current students in Spanish will be in 7th grade, we'll give them the option to continue Spanish or take encore in 8th grade.
Y los estudiantes actuales en la clase de español tendrán la opción de continuar a tomar la clase o de poder escoger una de las otras clases.
Okay. And then the last is just informational. 5th grade always does a great job. They're doing it now. They submit names for students in all of our levels in reading and math, including intervention, and they're doing that right now.
Y algo que están haciendo el equipo de quinto grado es enviar todos los nombres de los estudiantes en diferentes niveles de lectura y matemáticas, incluyendo a los que están en intervención.
All right. So, any questions?
Yeah, so the Rush executive functioning program is, and I think it's a really good idea for middle schoolers to help them get organized, learn systems of organization. You said that would take place in advisory. What about students who are in band and choir? Where are they gonna practice those executive functions?
You know, we didn't want to get too ambitious right away. And so our thought was to do more of a soft rollout of it, where we would train our social studies teachers and our SPED teachers and how to do that program. And then we would, provided we feel that we are comfortable with it, we would do that school-wide. And we're discussing doing it district-wide the following year, but that changes your supply lists. It changes a lot of things. And to be able to do that school-wide, we did not think we were ready yet. But that would be the goal, to get there. Not sure if that's satisfactory.
So in terms of reaching the band and choir students with the executive functioning curriculum, that's to be determined?
It would be determined, yeah. We want to offer it to everybody. I just don't want to commit to it until I say we can do it for everybody.
Yeah.
We know for sure we can capture a couple of those groups. Can Susan Borkowski and Just Resolves take time to teach that? Yes, they could. And it may be worth exploring that, being trained in that as well.
I think if you're looking at a long game on it, it could make it a school-wide system. I think it's a great skill for students to learn as they come in as a 6th grader and then practice it as a 7th and 8th grader. And then that becomes a life skill because so many of our students, with all of the distractions and stimuli that are around them, a lot of that executive functioning stuff kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And I think there's great potential for it if that could sort of filter up through the grade level.
Well, I think you make a great point that, I in the conversations with the 6th grade team, we really want to see the 6th grade team hit this very hard school-wide so that they get used to a certain system of how they keep track of their assignments, how they keep track of their agenda, where their pencil is every day. There's note-taking strategies. We want to see that be very strong in 6th grade, to your point, and I appreciate what you're sharing. I think it's worth looking at school-wide.
If you talked about a vertically aligned writing rubric, I think a vertically aligned executive functioning system, but also benefits students and staff as well. I think if students are all learning one way, then that really transfers into classroom management and work completion.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's, from what you're sharing, I agree that it's worth looking at getting school-wide even to some degree.
And then, so the decision to move Spanish as an elective in place of the arts rotation. And maybe, I understand the rationale, I understand the high school, how that is credited or not credited at the high school, I understand what you said about that. But at, first glance at the presentation earlier and then hearing it again, it sounds to me like for some students that becomes a bit of a Sophie's choice of, do I take my arts classes that I love, or do I take the Spanish that I really want to start to develop before I get to high school? It's so a student who elects to take Spanish in 7th and 8th grade does not have an opportunity for art or music or the other applied electives.
Sort of. So if you are in band or choir, of course, you have access to music, and you have that element. What we're working on right now is how we can offer the STEM element during advisory as well, for those that would take Spanish during the elective block and lose that element. So we are exploring how we could capture another group to do that in that particular piece. There is some choice, and I think this came, Dr. Durafi, you feel free to bail me out at any time, but as we've talked through this a little bit, there is some very good research that shows when you give students, any student period at the middle school level, especially students that are, the term that's being used now is at promise as opposed to at risk, that when you give choice in the middle grades, you actually get a lot stronger buy-in of what they are interested in doing, and they've made that pick, and they're more invested in it. So there is that element of it, but there is some give and take here. That's probably been the biggest shift, and that's what we spent some time talking about it in the schedule. Is now there is a little bit of an either-or choice, and we've already worked with Sarah Byrne and Hope Sohn on how they can offer some of their clubs and activities outside the school day as well. So Sarah Byrne has a broadcasting club she has going right now. She's got the yearbook club she's going, and she's working on photography with that. Hope Sohn with art as well, trying to provide enrichment opportunities outside the traditional. So I don't know if you have anything, Dr. Draka.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily would need to add much other than, as Mr. Cunningham and I had conversations about this, the decisions that we've made, the ideas behind these shifts have really been to prioritize meeting the needs of the many of our students who are not at grade level. So with any middle school schedule, you recognize we have a 7-hour day. We have to fit so many priorities within that 9-hour period that Peter's sharing. So I do think that the prioritization of language, improving our scores and our language capabilities of our children, in some ways trumps those electives. And I say that, and I don't mean to sound harsh, but in the comprehensive scope of what a child will take on in middle school and then high school, they'll have other opportunities to explore language, to explore art, to explore music, theater, things of those nature. So it's not completely uncommon for a middle school to have an elective period where students make choice. That does occur in many instances. It is, however, rare to see a school make the Spanish course a non-elective, meaning a requirement. So that was really where all of these shifts come from. I just want you to recognize that we haven't necessarily overlooked that, but in order to prioritize some of the elements, it does in some ways force our hand to give kids an elective position in our middle school, which is very common. I know, again, that may not be the perfect answer.
Yeah, and I certainly understand the desire to get the communication class back in and to work on those things. I understand why some of these changes are being sought. It seems like it's at the expense of the ability for some of our students to experience both a Spanish class if they're not in dual language and continue their enrichment in arts and recognize the potential for this communications art class to increase literacy and writing ability. But there's also connections to a robust arts curriculum and how those help to support math scores and literacy scores as well. So I don't want us to trade one good thing for another good thing and potentially lose some of the impact of a robust arts program.
Yeah, I certainly can understand and appreciate that. I think some of the things that this might cause us to think about is the potential for looking outside of the regular school day hours, right? For other opportunities. As a middle school principal myself, at one point, we had a pretty robust elective thing where there were many options that kids had to choose from. And obviously, the child did not have, was unable to take all of the electives that we had at that point. And so one of the things we did extend to be able to meet some of those needs, and I appreciate you mentioning some of the correlation between kids who get involved in the arts and music and some of their academic progress. There's definitely a strong correlation with that. But extending the school day to offer clubs, activities, art programs, music programs that extend beyond the school day to meet some of those needs in order for us to prioritize our core curriculum. Those are certainly things that we could explore, and I think we probably have the personnel. And I would agree, I know Mr. Rogers would agree that we have the resources. Even if he doesn't agree, that he would agree with that. So I think that's a possibility. I know that it doesn't necessarily, the alternative to that is really to create, I believe you have it, you would have to increase the number of periods per day, shorten the periods per day to make 38-minute classes or potentially to be able to add that third, which may have implications for staffing and things like that. But that would be the alternative solution to what you're expressing.
Thank you. I don't know that. I don't know where I land on it, but I appreciate the explanation.
And I wish I had just, it's as simple as this. I truly, from my heart, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think just in some situations, it becomes, we make some hard decisions as administrators, and we make some hard decisions as educators. And it becomes a point where we have to prioritize. What can we prioritize? And then how do we make some additional opportunities available to meet some extenuating needs? You want me to translate that for you, Sam?
Sam, you just left her out of the loop about 20 minutes ago. I should say,
Sorry, Allison. You translated that.
Uno de los comentarios es de que si van a poder proporcionar el currículum de funcionamiento ejecutivo a todos los niños. Algo que están diciendo es de que es un proceso lento que están tratando de sacar con ciertos grados ahorita, pero es algo que quieren poder ofrecer a todo el distrito, pero es algo que van a seguir trabajando, es algo que piensan que sería muy beneficiario para los niños. Y también estaban hablando sobre la parte de que los niños que ya no van a tener, si toman la clase de español, no van a tener la opción de poder tomar otra clase electiva, por ejemplo, como van a estar perdiendo una clase de arte y de música, y lo que estaban hablando era de que es una decisión difícil para ellos, pero es algo que piensan que les va a ayudar a los niños con la literatura, a poder mejorar para matemáticas, diferentes áreas, y algo que dice también es que algo que no es muy común que la clase de español sea una clase requerida y no sea una clase electiva en las secundarias. Y también mencionó que en la high school los niños van a poder tener muchas más clases selectivas de poder escoger y no van a poder tomar todas, solo ciertas clases, y es algo que piensan que también van a poder ayudar a motivar a los estudiantes que están participando en estas clases, porque es algo que a ellos les llama la atención.
And I think it's also, I think it's wonderful that we're working towards a heritage program, a heritage speaker. I think that that's a really important thing for our students who are heritage speakers to have that opportunity. So I appreciate the administration working to make that happen.
Yeah, and I would thank Peter for that as well. He really was sort of spearheading this and recognizing the need. We have sort of a niche within our community that really allows for this, and so him to be so flexible in his thinking to bring that into the Spanish language arts program is really cool.
Thank you, Mr. Cadell, just for that. That's good questions. I appreciate it's kind of some of the challenge to think through some of this and continue to think and reflect it and try to figure out what pathways there are and what the community's looking for.
Algo que también quería agradecer era que están agregando ese programa cultural para los hispanohablantes. Piensen que es algo que es muy bueno para los niños y los estudiantes. Dijo el señor Jaraca que es algo que tiene que agradecer al señor Peter por haber tomado el tiempo de hacer este plan para los niños. Y el señor Peter, muchas gracias. Mucho tiempo.
Just let's get that. Okay. What other questions?
I had a couple of questions. So and two things I kind of wanted to get clarification on based on what Dave was just asking. So for the executive functioning piece, are you proposing rolling that out across 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in advisory and in
We target special ed as well.
both those, but
Because you can write exactly.
across all 3 grades. I
Yes,
got you, but
we would do it in all 3 grades simultaneously. Advisory does not capture everyone.
Right.
To Dave Condell's point, it could be worth looking at if we just bring band and choir in alone, that covers everybody.
Right.
Period.
Well, I was wondering, as you were talking about doing kind of a soft level ad or a limited rollout, and I very much agree with what Dave said about how important that is for 6th graders coming in, but I also think it would be really beneficial to the 8th graders going out to have those skills for high school. So I just wondered if it was possible to capture that, or even if it would be possible to offer that as, I don't know, some kind of after-school elective to those kids if you know. They
Yeah,
want that.
it is. I will say that organization group does not really wrangle it in. It'd be about parents driving it, but we would spice it up a little bit. A lot of times you can even do it during lunch and they're like, oh, you figure out a way to get them into it. But I mean, from what, at least what I'm hearing is there's a lot of interest to try to get this as school-wide as possible. And because we see the need, we see our students, we want to make sure they're as best prepared as possible. And just the brain resets in middle school and everything you think they knew, it's gone. And then we need to rebuild that with them.
No, I think that's really important. The other, I'll let you go ahead.
Una de las preguntas también era de que poder extender el currículum del funcionamiento ejecutivo para todos los niños, porque también es muy importante para los niños de sexto grado entrando a la escuela secundaria, pero también creo que es algo muy beneficiario para los niños que van saliendo de octavo grado y van a entrar a la high school. Y lo que estaban diciendo es que ahorita pueden hacerlo, pero tienen que agregarlo también más con la clase de banda y de coro para poder llegar a todos los niños y también encontrar diferentes maneras de quizás hacerlo después de la escuela, ofrecerlo en diferentes áreas.
The other piece I wanted clarification on is you were talking about how if a student takes Spanish in 7th and 8th grade, then essentially they would be placed into a higher level at high school. But are both high schools still requiring placement tests?
Mundelein, I don't know if Mundelein does. I think they take our word for it, but Stevenson has us take the Apple assessment.
Okay.
They do take recommendations for teachers, and then yes, like you mentioned.
Okay. And then, okay, thank you.
Otra de las preguntas es que si las dos escuelas, las dos high schools, todavía requieren que tomen una evaluación antes de entrar, o si estaban tomando las clases que estaban tomando aquí. La high school, tomando en high school, está tomando lo que los maestros les dicen o recomendaciones. Para las students en high school sería una evaluación que se llama Apple.
And then I had a couple other questions. So you mentioned that you think it'll be about 6 kids per grade, moving into, like, heritage students per
Yeah.
grade moving into, the dual language arts program. Is that going to potentially increase the number of sections you would have at the grade level or no?
No, they both, every grade has room,
Okay,
if you will. So, yeah, there would be no increase in sectioning. It'd be nominal, especially if you balance it's 3 more students per class. Because usually there's 2 sections per grade,
okay,
with the exception of the current 7th grade has 1.
okay. And then, I'm sorry.
Otra de las preguntas es que había mencionado que había aproximadamente 6 estudiantes en cada grado que iban a entrar al programa cultural para hispanohablantes. Si van a incrementar las secciones que iban a tener de lenguaje dúo, y el director dijo que no iban a tener que incrementar las secciones porque sería aproximadamente 3 niños que agregaban a cada sección, así que no había necesidad de agregar más secciones porque tenían la capacidad para cada clase.
And then, in terms of curriculum for that class, for the Spanish language art class, I know that obviously dual is taught very differently than a traditional foreign language acquisition class or model. And the heritage Spanish classes are different from that as well. So how do you, or I know you mentioned a little bit about changing it to match kind of like English language arts, but how do you anticipate making curriculum changes that would then align with what the kids would need to know for high school?
I'm hoping I can answer this well, but we're trying to look, what we do is we use the standards to drive it. And so we would not be making some tweaks if we didn't see that there were still some areas that our students in Spanish acquisition needed foundationally, that we want to make sure that their grammar is correct. We want to make sure that some of their speaking is accurate. And so we still plan to use the dual, if this makes sense, we're planning to use the dual lit program that's been developed as the core. And then we're going to begin to look at each unit to ask how can we measure and strengthen our listening skills, our speaking skills, our reading and our writing skills. Reading is kind of there, the dual, but even writing all those pieces. And so that will be kind of where you would see some of the elements of maybe a Spanish class come in. But the novel has to stay kind of the core to build around in the unit. We just want to be honestly more intentional about building the Spanish literacy, if you will, that we want to make sure we're sending them off with. We have confidence our students can speak well. We feel confident our students can write. A lot of the reading and listening is there, but we want to make sure they're coming out well-rounded. I'm not sure that.
And yeah, and so just as Mr. Cunningham has mentioned, yes, we're going to stick to the 4 domains of language that he was mentioning, but also part of that too, and we've noticed as we assess students through the program, they're coming into the dual language program in the middle school, maybe not having some of the language skills, the appropriate way to conjugate verbs, simple language, and so it's going to be that marriage between developing language and also developing vocabulary while still using it, as Mr. Cunningham had just mentioned, some of the literature curriculum that has existed in dual lit, but then also marrying some of the Spanish language arts curriculum that exists. So no matter where you finish in 8th grade, you have the opportunity to go to a high school and potentially go into Spanish 2 or Spanish 3, depending on the nature of your skill set. And so this is trying to strengthen both some of the natural components that you were mentioning about the dual language program, but then also recognizing that we've seen it, especially our L1 English speakers are coming in with some deficits in terms of just basic language skills. So that's where the ideology came from. And not to mention that many of our heritage speakers also don't have the language skills. They might have the vocabulary and the natural speaking and listening coming from their home, but they don't have the other skills.
And I don't want to get carried. We wouldn't call it a heritage program. Essentially, we're identifying students that we say have Spanish speaking. If they're identified at home, they speak Spanish. It would not be what you might see at the high school, where these are students that I can trace I can say I'm Hispanic, and it's addressing culture as well, or things. It wouldn't really be doing that. It's just that we're bringing these students we found go into Spanish 1, and they don't need to know their colors. They don't need to know their numbers. That's not, and it creates this interesting dichotomy for the teacher to try to address in Spanish 1. So what is it strengthens Spanish 1, and it strengthens our more native speakers' abilities by joining the dual language that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I do think that the dual program does look at the cultural piece too. You know, that would align with the heritage.
Uno de los comentarios era de que si el currículum, cómo se iba a ver para los estudiantes que estuvieran en el programa cultural de hispanohablantes y cómo iba a diferenciar a lo que estaba antes para que estén preparados para cuando vayan a entrar a la high school. Algo que mencionaron es de que se va a ver un poco diferente, pero lo que quieren concentrarse es en poder enfocarse en la gramática, en escribir, leer y poder hablar el español para que estén listos para cuando entren a la high school. Y no, por ejemplo, los estudiantes ahorita tienen que entrar a español 1 y se está concentrando en aprender sus colores y que son cosas que ya ellos saben. Así que ellos podrían entrar a la siguiente clase que sería de lenguajes de arte en español y poder forzar esas habilidades y poder mejorar en su gramática, en la lectura y lectura y en el habla. Salud de lectura.
Oh, this is great.
So this is kind of a strange question, but what if you have a very low number of students choose to go into Spanish as an elective? Are you still going to run the class?
We will, because especially, that's an interesting question. That's what happens when you're offering choice. We're not a high school, right? So you don't crush section. But we would just offer as many typically. When we have classes, our honors math class tends to be very small. Not always, and we'll continue to increase it because by the time we're done, like 3-year plans, everyone is honors qualified. Yeah. No, we'd love to see that grow, of course, but we wouldn't run only one section of it, and that would be fine, and it actually fit very well, if that makes sense. But especially for those that are currently in 7th grade Spanish, even if, let's say, 3 kids signed up, we will run it because those 3 kids join Spanish, the expectation they're going to get a chance to do it. So we would not do that to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Una de las preguntas es si había un número vago de que se registran para la clase de español, si todavía van a hacer esa clase. El director mencionó que sí, que aunque sean 3 estudiantes que se registran para la clase de español, van a poder participar en la clase de español, ya sea que ellos bajen solamente una sección en español, pero ellos van a poder ofrecer eso porque es una expectativa que tienen los estudiantes cuando se registran para la clase de español.
Just as a follow-up to that, looking the other direction, what are the staffing implications, not only in Spanish classes, section sizes in Spanish, but what about the other electives? How do you plan for that? How do you anticipate what are you going to have 100 kids sign up for DMA and no place to put them, or
because it's a wheel, there's 3 classes, so they're divided by trimesters, so they're divided evenly through semesters. So now,
but not knowing how many are going to choose Spanish versus the wheel, what are there staffing implications to that, or are there section size implications to that?
The potential to section sizes, and all sections have room, if that makes sense. The advantage to doing this is we don't run into real major issues with sectioning. We know how many are currently in Spanish, for example. A number of them will be identified for the heritage piece should they choose it. We have a number that our Spanish teachers already kind of surveyed to see who would be interested in what this or that. Obviously, it's a decision made by the family, but we think that there's not any plan to change any sections, if that makes sense. Everybody's going to offer their full sectioning, and we anticipate because all areas have room to be flexible, we're not going to lose an art section. We're not going to lose something a Spanish teacher would have a full schedule, if you will. Everybody in multiple scenarios we've run through, everybody has a full schedule, if that makes sense, which is another reason we felt comfortable enough to present it and talk about it, regardless of contingency, if it was so popular one way or the other. And just also so the board knows, students do have to pick now a little bit. You don't get everything even in the wheel. If you're in band, you get STEM, but if you're not in band, you get music. So we have some students that don't get STEM at all. And so we found a way creatively to do it this year, where we had Ms. Kluger's teach it in advisory, because those kids in advisory aren't in band. And we're trying to do that again next year. So if a kid does take Spanish, we've got a creative way, we think, where they're gonna be able to get STEM. So even if they missed out on the wheel, they're still gonna potentially get an option for STEM or music, depending on what's happening there. And we will also have a couple after-school offerings as well. So we are trying to address some of those pieces, if that makes sense.
Otra de las preguntas era ya como en la clase de español, sino ya en las otras clases que ofrecen, como arte, música, DMIQs, si van a tener suficiente, si van a correr como problemas en no tener suficiente personal para las clases o estudiantes que se registran más en una o en otra. El director mencionó que que están ellos a gusto con los números que tienen en cada clase. También han tomado ya encuestas con los estudiantes y las familias de más o menos qué clases van a querer tomar y se sienten a gusto con esos números. Y también, por ejemplo, todos los estudiantes de alguna manera van a poder recibir, por ejemplo, si están en banda, van a poder recibir views como una clase de consejería, tratar de encontrar maneras creativas para poder ofrecer esas clases y poder que reciban ya sea una o la otra clase.
Then I'll be quiet.
This is great. I'm not joking. It's great.
So my last question is, okay, by adding an extra 45 minutes of English language arts through the Commerce program, what is the outcome you're looking to achieve? And how are you going to be able to determine whether or not making this change is successful?
We'll use outlets to speak to some of that, but I know initially what we've done as part of that MTSS process I mentioned is we really prioritize how we're using STAR reading. And so we will want to see, we have typical growth. We want to see 100% of our students in typical growth. That's the reality. We want to see a higher percentage of them hitting that growth. We want to see a higher percentage of them outside of what we would call tier 2 level. So tier 2 is 30th percentile or below in reading. We would like to see a significant population of our students much more shift out of that range. That will tell us from fall to spring if it's been successful by approaching a second ELA class as a core, as opposed to a pull-out intervention where you lose Spanish. Because if a student, again, in some ways we are increasing access to Spanish, because if I'm a student that was in an intervention, I never got a chance to take it. Or if I'm a special education student, I never got a chance to take it because I needed my reason. Now everybody does, but it's a give and take with art and media and those things.
Uno de los siguientes comentarios eran que cuál era la meta o el resultado final que les gustaría ver por agregar esos 45 minutos de tiempo de lectura básica. Algo que mencionó el director es que lo que quieren es poder ver el crecimiento en las evaluaciones STAR que le hacen los niños, poder salir del porcentaje del 38% que puedan subir de su nivel para que es algo que les gustaría poder ver.
And I think that probably covers a lot of it there. I think also we do look at the IAR test, and that's a lot of our district goals are set off that. So don't neglect that. We'd like to see year-over-year growth, and by that we want to see more students that are in that meets range or approaching that we're not before, and also our students that are in access. I'd like to hit a more normed exit rate of students that exit out of the ELL program that we've had since kindergarten, first grade. We'd like to see that percentage of students increase. So those are the three things locally we're looking at.
Yeah, and I would reiterate some of the same things, just that by adding additional minutes in English language arts through ComArts, we expect to move our kids up in terms of their student growth percentile and their percentile rankings. So that's easily accessible to be able to look at those kids and see where they started and if they're.
Thank you. Otra de las dos áreas que quieren también ver, que vean para los estudiantes es el IAR test, que es un examen del estado, y también lo que están viendo ahí son los porcentajes de los estudiantes. También otra evaluación que hacen los niños es se llama Access Test, que es un examen que toman cada año los estudiantes de inglés como segundo lenguaje y quieren ver que sus niveles salen. Niños que están participando en programas de que estaban en kinder, poder salir de ese programa.
So you started the presentation off by saying that you wanted to place the focus more on reading writing, listening, speaking, just reading in general. And that 100% of our students could use and benefit from more reading time, and I totally agree with you. So do you plan on making changes? Because what I see is creating a more robust dual language literature class, right? The SLA class, and then adding the Com Arts section. Do you plan on revising or changing any of the ELA curriculum?
Yeah, that's an integral part of it. So what'll happen is we have one teacher that's positioned to teach communication arts in all 3 grades. And that will become a major piece of the cohesion. That's what's happening vertically. I'm speaking correctly about that. So the idea is that a student would not need to have 2 ELA classes to have a complete picture of ELA. Because if you're in a dual language program, you will have an ELA and an SLA class. You will not take Com Arts because SLA, that's your literacy class, that's your reading class, your second one. So the ELA class for those dual students or students in intervention, math intervention, should be able to be enough. And we want to make our ELA class more robust. And that includes, we focused specifically this spring, we just met with, said our focus, we want to really look at is our writing rubrics and improving how we're increasing those skills. Again, that goes as executive functioning as well in terms of how you organize it. All those things are combined. It's all stuff we want to do. But we thought thoughtfully about writing and what we want to build with that. Probably if I had to pick one of the 4, we're very interested in seeing our Gen Ed ELA strengthen that so that you don't have to take Com Arts because not everybody will have it. But we want to see the general ed ELA class work, and we think a second ELA teacher is going to help strengthen that relationship because now it's not a singleton, it's a team of teachers, which we really want to create that environment.
No, that's great. That's really great to hear.
Una de las preguntas era que, como había mencionado al principio de la presentación, el 100% de los estudiantes deberían de, beneficiarían de poder recibir algún tipo de intervención o recursos para la literatura. Lo que mencionó ella también es que se habló mucho del programa de lenguaje vivo, si era algo que también estaban pensando en poder revisar o cambiar para el programa de educación general de ELA. Algo que estaban diciendo es de que si están en el programa actual, van a estar recibiendo SLA y también ELA, que es lenguaje de artes en español y lenguaje de artes en inglés, y están en ELA en lenguaje de artes en inglés, estarían también en Com Arts.
Okay.
And then just a second question, just looking into the future, do you plan on assessing the Spanish language portion for our students, just the way that we would like for STAR or we've assessed them in the past?
We piloted the Apple assessment 2 years ago, last school year. And then this year, just because of the nature of our instructional program, we didn't offer the Apple with the exception of those students who needed it for placement. But our intention is to continue to use the Apple, which does gauge the speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills of our dual language students. So it gives us a grade level equivalent, so to speak, as useful as that may be. It gives us an idea as to what level the children are at.
Una de las otras preguntas es si va a haber un tipo de evaluación, como por ejemplo el STAR que hacen a los niños, para poder ver el nivel de los estudiantes en los grupos de lenguaje vivo. Lo que contestaron fue que el año pasado, anterior, pudieron empezar a conocer como la primera vez de poder hacer una evaluación que se llama Apple. Debido a lo que sucedió el año pasado, no lo volvieron a hacer, pero solamente a los estudiantes que lo tenían que tomar para poder ponerlos en el lugar debido para la high school. Pero es algo que van a continuar, van a querer que hacer en los años próximos, y eso va a poder decirles el nivel exacto del crecimiento de los niños que están en el grupo de lenguaje vivo.
If I could just add one more thing, I just want to express my appreciation for for Mr. Cunningham and going through this. It's a small school, and when you have a small school, it creates some intricacies that are unique to small schools. And so he's been very creative and thoughtful in terms of prioritizing what it is we want to prioritize and ensuring our kids get, a strong core curriculum. And then being creative with all of the other little nuances and what we would call singletons, all those little elective pieces and sort of one-offs that are outside of the core curriculum that do require some creativity. So I just want to express my appreciation.
Thanks, Dr. I appreciate Dr. Duraka's compliment, and he's played a huge role in helping think through any of this. And this is Mr. Peterson while we're at it. Other questions?
Well, first I wanted to echo Joy and Dave's support of the executive functioning skills. I think like I support it across the district. We can start the earlier the better. As I can already tell, my second grader had some deficiencies in it. So, but my question is, what advantage do dual language students get in high school, going into high school, and would the heritage students get those advantages as well?
Yeah, so the dual language program offers children an opportunity to learn the language, obviously, and then also learn some of the biliteracy and bicultural skills. When they leave the middle school, the advantage that they have is potentially moving to Spanish 2 to start, or potentially Spanish 3. When you get through Spanish 3, the next level is Spanish 4, and then you have the opportunity for AP Spanish Literature or AP Spanish Language Arts when you get to the high school. Completing that course of study, if you will, then allows the child to take the seal of biliteracy and get that certification. Along the way, the benefits are biliteracy, they are biculturalism. So those are the primary benefits of the program.
So is there like do they, so I know that you were saying Spanish language takers, like first 7th and 8th graders can skip Spanish 1. Is it just, it's the same across the board? They all just kind of have to test into a certain?
Yeah, for the most part, when it's different depending on the high school, but for the most part, they'll take a placement assessment, and then they'll be placed in either the first year of Spanish, or if they're more proficient in Spanish, they'll take the second year of Spanish. Now, some of our kids who may just take the Spanish elective and are not in school may also accelerate into Spanish too as well. That's very typical of a middle school to offer that Spanish elective. Does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good. I wasn't aware at all, so it's good to have that background information.
Uno de los comentarios, una de las preguntas era que cuáles son algún tipo de como beneficio o algo que les da a los niños cuando entran a high school, cuando están participando, ya sea en la clase de lenguaje tubo o si están en el programa nuevo cultural para hispanohablantes. Algo que mencionaron es de que normalmente cuando entran a high school tienen que tomar una evaluación para ponerlos en la cierta clase que deben entrar, ya sea español 1, español 2 o español 3, y siguiente de eso es el español 4, y después es la clase AP de español, y les da la opción ya de poder hacerlo para literatura, y les puede dar ese certificado de comprensión pues para el nivel del colegio. Y
What else?
Anything else?
You're ready, just want more, huh?
I don't know, it's great. Come to school every time, this is great.
Well, I could add to, I echo what Dr. Gardner said. We had talked in the very early fall with Mr. Green and Mr. Peterson about some of the challenges that he sees as far as what the middle school, the whole programming, instructional resources, schedule looks like. So we encouraged him to get creative, to work with staff in such a challenging year when we didn't have staff available here, put together a committee. He worked with that team. He worked with Dr. Drug, he worked together with Mr. Peterson, and I think have come up with the best solution that we can to maximize not only our staff and our resources, but provide the most experiences for our kids. So I want to thank you all three of you for that. If you would like to
mencionar es agradecerle al señor Cunningham por tener la flexibilidad y poder, como por ejemplo al principio del año no había suficiente personal y poder hacer un comité para poder ayudarse entre ellos mismos y esa creatividad y el tiempo que ha tomado para poder hacer todo esto posible. Y también quiero agradecer a los otros 3 directores.
I think just based on today's questions and discussion, we'll probably have more at the principal's copy tomorrow. So based on that, I think we'll maybe meet again and provide another opportunity for families and communities, once things get more finalized, right before they leave for the summer and then again in the fall, for just people to ask questions.
Y basado en las preguntas y comentarios que hubo esta noche, piensa que va a haber varias preguntas y comentarios en el café con el director en la mañana. También algo que quieren decir es que quieren agregar otras oportunidades para poder ofrecer más información, ya que vaya pasando el año, quizás antes de que pase el año, en el verano, para poder contestar y hacer cualquier tipo de comentario sobre estos cambios que van a hacer.
Thank you.
Okay. That concludes our presentation. Thank you, everyone. And thank you very much, Sammy, for translating it. That was very helpful. And I know it was a lot. We will now move on to our business agenda for the evening. We have 2 items on the business agenda. One is just for review, and that's on this vote agenda, which we will be taking action on at the next meeting. And the other item on the business agenda is for approval tonight or for action tonight, and that is the personnel item. So be it resolved, the Diamond Lake 76 Board of Education accepts and approves the personnel items as depicted on the agenda. We have 2 resignations. May I have a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Lozado?
Yes.
Mr. Candela?
Yes.
Mr. Armenta? Ms. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Halpern?
Yes.
Ms. Kwan? Yes. Ms. Sullivan?
Motion passes. Thank you. And that concludes our business agenda for the evening. And we will now move on to board discussion.
So I've included one item for board discussion, which is the interview of potential board candidates. As we know, we have 3 vacant positions with, 4 vacant positions and 3 board members that have running for the 4 positions. So that leaves us with 1 vacancy with Mr. Lozada not returning for another term. We have 3 potential committee members who have expressed interest in serving on the board. And so I'd like to bring up to the board 2 possible dates prior to our next 2 meetings, which is April 20th and May 4th, of doing board interviews prior to the meeting. So if we did, one at 5:30, one at 6, and then one at 6:30, we can start our meeting at 7. And if we needed an additional day, or felt like that wasn't enough time, and we needed to follow up, I'm also proposing, May 4th, not necessarily at 5:30, but just the next meeting prior to the next board meeting after that. So how do people feel about the availability and just the process that we're going to be using?
Yep, I think sooner the better.
And that would be good.
Okay, so I'll work with Ms. Bishop to arrange, contact those candidates and then set up interviewing times with them. And then I know Mr. Lozada volunteered to be available on the 20th as well. Prior to that, so that'll be a good perspective. Okay, that's all I have.
Great. Then we moving on to freedom of information requests. We did not have any notices and communications. We have our usual reminder of the Board of Education meeting calendar for the school year, and then the March 10 Edge came out. Do we have any other notices of communication? No? Okay, then we will move on to public comments and petitions on non-agenda items. As usual, if you have a public comment, please feel free to type that in the chat box and we will read that into the meeting.
3 comments that are on here right now is just the sound. One user is having difficulty hearing us. That's the only comments that are here right now.
Okay, we'll give them a minute just to have the opportunity to comment if there's anything else. looks like something popped up.
Will the next board meeting be in person?
Yes, we plan on having it in person, yes. But it will also be available via Zoom. We don't have any intention of discontinuing the Zoom because we feel it makes it more accessible to everyone. Okay, does not look like we have any other comments. So moving on to others. Does anyone have any others this evening?
We had a special delivery today from a community member who left us a note and some treats to share with everyone here tonight. A thank you note. Dear District 76 administrators and school board members, thank you for your extraordinary efforts and dedication to the safety, education, and well-being of the District 76 community throughout these insane times. Elise Helen. So she brought us some treats in recognition of all of our efforts, but also to congratulate, I hope, our 3 new board members, 2 returning and 1 new. So congratulations, well done, Mr. Hellman, on your re-election. Thank you, Stephanie.
Very much. Thank you, Elise. Please pass on our thanks, John.
And we can introduce in closed session, and I'll pass it on to, unless you guys want to stay here.
I had one thing for others. I don't know if anyone else had noticed or had seen the communication we've gotten from IASB on House Bill 7. Or do you know what I'm talking about? It's the bill that's currently, there's an equal bill in the Senate, with Senate Bill 2016, that is about school consolidation. Yeah, and it's looking to potentially consolidate a minimum of 25% of the school districts in Illinois. So I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up and get that on everybody's radar. It looks like, based on the information we got from IASB earlier this week, that House Bill 7 was passed out of committee on the promise to make amendments and return to committee for further discussion. So I just wanted to get that on everyone's radar. Yeah, and I was going to ask you, Dr. Sherman-Lewis, if you had heard anything from any of our law firms, if we had gotten any updates from them about it.
And I haven't, so that I will follow up with it.
Okay, great.
And what was it?
2016. It's supposed to have identical language. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Does anyone else have any others? No? Okay, then we will adjourn to executive session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity. May I have a motion to adjourn into executive session?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Condola?
Yes.
Mr. Lozada?
Yes.
Mr. Armenta? Ms. Hale?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Ms. Kwan? Yes. Ms. Sullivan?